So I'm Sujit Sivasundaram. I'm Professor of World History at the University of Cambridge and a Fellow at Gonville and Caius College, one of the colleges at the University of Cambridge. So I was doing my PhD on the Pacific in the 18th and 19th century, and I used to think of this PhD as everything that happened between the voyages of Captain Cook and Charles Darwin, so two British voyagers in the Pacific. But really, the PhD was not about these great men and their voyages. It was about what was going on at the ground level in Pacific Island societies between missionaries and settlers and indigenous peoples. And so the paper was about the display of Pacific Islanders in Europe and in Britain, and the way they were brought back by missionaries, and really arguing that it was possible to collect people and display them in Europe in the early 19th century. Why was that possible? How was this a kind of collecting? What agendas drove it? And what was the fate of these people? And that was published in History of Science, the journal. Well, over the pandemic, I have become very nostalgic about Colombo, which is the city that I grew up in. And so my new project, one of my new projects is likely to be on the city of Colombo. And the reason for telling the story is because it's not a city that we know very well in the West. People don't know very much about the history of Colombo, so it's a story that we don't know. But actually it's a story that is very telling and important for our present moment, because Colombo was originally a Muslim settlement on the river Kalania, which is on the west coast of Sri Lanka. Then it was taken over by the Portuguese, then by the Dutch, then by the British, and now there is a major program of infrastructural work being undertaken in the city of Colombo by the Chinese. And so one could argue that it's a place which is multiply colonized, and it's a global South city which is expanding massively at the present moment in the 21st century. So if we want to think about some of the problems in the global South, one could argue that the expansion of cities is one of these. The whole planet, arguably, is being urbanized in new ways as people move to cities and migrate to cities. We saw this in the middle of the pandemic, when suddenly, migrant laborers had to sort of suddenly leave cities and go back to their homes in rural areas, and the problems that arose. And so really, how do we understand this? How do we understand the global South city today? And so to understand that, it's possible to follow the story of Colombo, I would argue, as one case study. That's an interesting one. Yeah, so I have been interested in disconnection for quite a while, in fact, and I was thinking about this when I wrote a book on Sri Lanka called Islanded, which was not the last book, but the one before. I think the last sentence of the book is, a connection is a disconnection when viewed from another direction. So the reason for that is that we can romanticize connection. We can think that the ocean is a connector, people move across ships, migrants move, trading commodities move, enslaved peoples move, and so this is a story of connection. But really, when the nature of a connection depends very much on your perspective, and something that is a connection from one perspective is fundamentally a disconnection from another perspective. And so to really understand the nature of globalization, we need to build into connection an idea of disconnection as well. Meaning that really connection is tied to capitalism, it's tied to imperialism, it's tied to infrastructure, as you quite rightly said. And all of these things have limits, right? And so when you get to the limit, then you realize that only certain things are being connected and other things are not. Or in certain times, certain things are connected and other things are not. And really to understand globalization more fully, I would argue, we need to locate it within capitalism and imperialism and inequality. And then we get to disconnection, which is really a fundamental principle, which helps us understand the historical past, and certainly over oceans as well.